have around 30 minutes, so we'll try to squeeze in a fairly important topic, and unfortunately it gets a little, let's say, a lot of visibility these days. I mean, I want to continue on what Kedar mentioned with the deepfake scare that he showed, right? The same Deloitte report there recently came out, which said that 70% of users who use ChatGPT and the other models that we talk about publicly, that's 70% of them are very worried about their privacy. 70% doesn't scare me. What scares me is that the 30% who don't feel worried. In fact, our CEO out here, Mr. Raju Dodti, is an avid user of ChatGPT, and I'm sure this question posed to him, he would be on the 70% side. I hope so, sir. Coming back, I think we have an eminent panel here. The topic is fairly in the public domain now. Just a few weeks ago, even the Prime Minister of the country alluded to this about privacy and ethics in AI. And I think it was Indian Mobile Congress a few weeks ago where he actually mentioned that the government will be taking steps, at least to introduce some guidelines for self-regulation. I'm not sure when that will come out, but I'm sure it's very soon. So, excuse me. So we'll start off with the panelists, and want to call upon Ms. Mody here to perhaps take the first question, which is around the Data Privacy Act. Ma'am, first question obviously is, as a banking and fintech player, what risks do you foresee with the new act that's coming there?
Many. This is a, call it iconic or startling piece of legislation which has not come into effect, where the rules have not yet been framed. But industry is rightly thinking about where it's going to go. So before we had a fairly loose system. One consent covered everything. We didn't have to really worry too much, provided the consent form was ticked and signed. But the simplistic regime has been completely replaced by the DPDPA. And now for usage, storage, collection, sharing, for everything concerning personal data in a digitized form, you need affirmative consent, which is not your kitchen sink omnibus consent clauses. You cannot have someone sign a call saying Zia Mody says, I agree that all my personal information will be shared by anybody, everybody, for anything, anytime, forever. Doesn't work anymore. And right now, you guys have to obviously figure out that you're probably data fiduciaries. So sorry. Sabya has been saying very strongly, I'm a data processor. Good for him. As a law firm, I don't know what we are, frankly. But suffice it to say that you now have to be very clear from what you have to get from the data principal, which is the ultimate customer. He has to know for what he's giving his consent, why he's giving his consent, and he has full freedom to withdraw his consent or to change his consent. And the problem is that you're kind of stuck as a data fiduciary because you're the last one on the hook. If you make a mistake, Raju has to pay 250 crores each time, okay? So the legalese has to be well documented and each step has to be thought out. So you could have more than one data fiduciary in a particular product. You could have separate and standalone consents that you require. You could have cybersecurity issues that you need to address. And what happens if I give you my consent, you use it, and then after 6 months I withdraw it? I'm entitled to withdraw it. You've used the data. So things are in a flux, and I think it's still an evolving space, but it's an important space which could have consequences.
Got it. I mean, obviously, that worries us a lot. And Sabya here represents the industry in a way. So maybe I'm going to turn the question to him. Sabya, I mean, like, what role do you see for industry participants like yourself in how we can regulate ourselves here?
So I think I can simply say in 5 words, pretty much, but I will go a little beyond. The 5 words first, let me explain, and which I believe at Perfios also has been our DNA, which is basically never store any data is what I would say is the first principle. Pretty much they are saying without a specific consent for a specific purpose. That is more applicable to fiduciary, but as a processor, as soon as the process gets over, it is supposed to be purged. As far as this principle is followed, I think we are on the right side of the law. The rules are yet to be seen. Now coming to the point which we are discussing, and I see many industry players coming together to raise this with the necessary authorities and policymakers. My point of view there is that minimize the data footprint. That's the first point that we should follow. If we do that, you're pretty much getting closer to adhering to the rules. The next is what kind of data privacy practices that you follow. You should only get the data and process the data for that specific purpose that you have taken the consent for. I think today, the question that is coming is, do we have even the right data structure to measure that? We need to do a lot of work on that as an industry from a financial institution's perspective, but I think everybody is aware and getting there. That's number one. Number two is the product design mechanisms. So when you're designing the product, that itself should be able to prove in question whenever there is a question. So there has to be enough audit trail to kind of produce the records as required whenever required. Are you following that? That's the second part. And third is AI-specific practices, which generally all of us know, but 2 important points that I would like to make there is, one is any such technology, and specific to AI and LLM, there are a lot of biases. So that means, and there is apparent bias, there is hidden bias. And you have to address both. If you're doing that, then good. If you're not, you need to train the model to do it. I think industry is working on that. And the second bit is typical leakage happens, which we have seen, is while you are training, building the model in large LLM cases. So you need to, and that's called jailbreaking in technology terms, which happens. You need to protect and build boundaries around that. I think industry is working towards that. We as a company follow most of this. Some things that we need to improve, we are working on that. But I think this is what the industry needs to do and is getting done.
Got it. I mean, that's very pertinent, I suppose, right? As a player, you have to kind of, put certain guardrails there. Within RBI Innovation Hub, is this a problem you guys are actively looking at and addressing for us as an industry participant? That's when I say us, that's what I mean.
Yeah, of course. I think this is one of the very crucial areas that we are focused on. How do we ensure that we can keep the privacy? How can we address anything around the data confidentiality? Right. And I think that's our main goal right now, because as we are working towards frictionless credit, we want people's trust in the system. Right. They should be able to understand and know that their data is safe. And only then we can be going further.
Got it. Got it. But when you talk about trust, right, I mean, with all these, news coming out in the industry quite regularly about, people like deepfake or people identity fraud and all of that, right? How difficult do you think this task is going to get? Technology is advancing, and, while threats are emerging, newer and newer threats, I know you don't represent the regulator per se, but being the entity that's spurring this innovation, how do you kind of balance this innovation with responsibility?
I think already we are seeing that it's getting bigger and bigger in scale. We
Right.
saw this movie Jamtara, if you've seen it, where
Right.
you are just seeing that now villagers have access to this technology. They're
Correct.
able to fool people.
Yes.
And just with all this open source AI, Gen AI that we are talking
Right.
about. So
Right.
earlier the technology was limited to a select few who could afford this technology. But now it's almost in the hands of everyone.
Right.
And
right.
these incidents, as they're coming to light, it's giving more and more ideas.
Right. Right.
So that's why this whole dynamic business is there, where, it's always, we have to constantly try to, think like the fraudster so that
Got
we
it.
can beat the fraudster.
Got it. Got it. I mean, while we're talking about fraud and all of that, right? I mean, obviously, companies are also generating a lot of data, and they're hoarding a lot of data of individuals and all of that, right? Now, the key question that emerges, and perhaps it's a question for you, ma'am, is about the property. Who owns this data? And whose intellectual property is it? Like, do I own the data? Like, I think there was recently a case of Scarlett Johansson in the US, whose voice was actually used, or a replica of her voice was used by OpenAI, none other than OpenAI. Now, what do you do?
Yeah, what do you do? So what is copyright? Copyright is ownership of some work product, right? And that belongs to the copyright owner. Even today, under Indian law, you don't have to actually register your copyright. You own it. Now, if that proprietary copyrighted data, which belongs to me, is used in an AI world where, without my consent, because they've just used it, and they make another product which is morphed using my copyright data. Technically, that's an infringement. Again, under Indian law, copyright can belong only to a human being. So, AI is not a human being. Then, is it joint ownership of copyright? Is that possible? Can I sue as Zia Mody because it was mine? I can. Who do I sue? The person who's used it. Will I ever know? Because it's floating out there, right, in the big bad world. And then copyright leads to trade secrets. There are things which are just trade secrets. If that is again floating, how do you protect that? If you have registered trademarks which belong to L&T, and it is used in some shape or form by someone else, it's a trademark of which you are the owner. So then how will you sue how many people, and how are the rules going to give some fair dealing exception or some safe harbor? Which goes back to what he was saying, Sabya, that if your process from start to finish is documented, that is your safe harbor.
Got it, got it. I mean, two questions emerge from that, ma'am. I mean, one is on regulation itself. Are the current regulations enough, like you mentioned, Copyright Act? Is that good enough, or you think that has to evolve? And maybe I have another question, but for Sabya, but I'll come to that later.
It was good enough.
Okay.
Right? It's lasted for about 200 years. But now you have this new animal which can take what belongs to you, unknown that it is committing a breach. It's in all this world out there with data which is dumped to be processed. So I think that there will have to be rules which, if your consent is not taken, maybe they go back to you for your consent, and then you are in a very strong negotiating position, which doesn't help the data fiduciary or the data processor.
Correct.
I think there'll have to be some fair dealing exception, or now you may have to register your copyright, which earlier you didn't have to do.
Right, right. I mean, the same question to you, Sabya, again, from a participant. I mean, are you guys taking this seriously enough already, or is that something that you're waiting for the rules to emerge?
I think we are taking it very seriously from the day we conceptualized the idea of creating Perfios, which is 16 years back.
Right.
Three things which is very important, as I said in my initial thoughts, which is whatever you are processing, you should have the consent from the consumer, because I think a lot of companies get it wrong. Who is the owner of the data?
Right.
It's you and me. Who is the end
Right.
consumer?
Correct,
What is financial institution? They are the custodian of that data.
correct.
So the consent has to be taken not from the custodian, but the owner of the data, which is you
Correct.
and me.
Yes.
Right? What is the purpose for which you will be processing? For the specific purpose.
Yes.
And the third is, how do you ensure, which is not in our control, which is pretty much the fiduciary's control, what is it getting used for, and after that, and monitoring that.
Right.
So first two, we are pretty much taking care as an industry participant, and I mean, we, as I said, we never store any active users data. So that's the first point. But I think, I mean, if I can extend, unless you have a specific point there, I mean, there are a lot of innovations that is happening on this space, which is AI,
Right.
to help demonstrate eventually. I mean, I'll say this is work in progress, everybody has not achieved there, which will take care of some of this. The first thing is, when we are using any AI, it should be explainable. So explainability. Are you able to explain? And that's the first question that everybody is trying to answer within their own ambit.
Right.
Likewise, we are. The next is, I feel, which is important, is the human-AI collaboration.
Yes.
If that happens, the relevant feedback comes at the right time, you'll build the right model. You cannot say autonomous, I will just do the automation and let the model run on its own.
Right.
Doesn't happen.
Right.
There are enough biases which I touched in the previous point. And the third one which I see is the multimodal models. That is, there are different type of data that you will see, data structures that you will see. How do you address all of those? I think all of us are working through these three. Now, then there are different technologies which are there, which is evolving.
Got it.
To answer some of those. Now, the first being, which some of us in the room would have heard, which is privacy preserving federated. Now, all of us in the room, if we come together and share our learnings and data, it is much better controlled. Correct. Today doesn't happen. Eventually, my belief is it will start happening.
Okay. Do you, I mean, maybe some of us in the audience might think that it's neither the financial, let's say the fiduciary responsibility entity or the individual that owns the data today, it's big tech that owns the data. Is that true to an extent? Because I don't know if all the folks here actually believe we own our data now anymore. I know this is perhaps controversial, but happy to hear your views.
No, I would say big tech is trying to do a lot of stuff, but ultimately the data belongs to all of us.
Yes.
We need to protect our data. We need to know our rights,
yes.
which consumers in today's scenario are aware. So whether it is big tech or the financial institution, they need to figure it out.
Right.
We are in the journey to figure it out.
Okay.
And there are technologies today available, which is very expensive. It is moving a little slow. I don't know if all of you have heard, but that's called homomorphic encryption, where without decrypting also the sensitive data can cross over.
Okay.
Now that's a fantastic technology, but it's expensive because it is in a very initial phase.
Right.
I think that will do a lot of work.
Got it, yeah. Because the obvious concern that emerges from this is exploitation, right? You know, we have seen enough cases in the news about exploitation. I mean, what do you suggest? Maybe Parul, you should perhaps take this question of how do you think we as consumers can prevent exploitation of what we do?
I think that's a very important point because usually when we think of fraud, like a lot of people talk about controls and how we will be stopping the fraud later on after the transaction is coming in. But a lot of it is actually preventable. And that's where the consumer awareness comes in. So like right now we are seeing a lot more awareness happening about, the different kind of scams. You're constantly hearing about it in the media. And now that's why, at least people in the urban cities are aware of, that job scams are there. There's a scam around FedEx. But if you think about tier 2, tier 3 cities, they're still a bit far off. They still don't have as much access to information.
Right.
So it's a big joint responsibility that, how we as financial institutions, how do we ensure that the consumers are aware.
Right.
And the prevention is actually the first step that we can take in terms of control.
Right, right. I mean, this, again, is a good pivot into the other auxiliary topic that we have, which is on the ethical use of the data, right? So the one part is about actually like preventing exploitation. The other part is how do we ensure that it's ethically used, right? And so, I mean, for a financial entity like ours, I mean, we want to use the data for financial purposes and all of that, right? And how, I guess the question here is that if we were to kind of look at participants in the ecosystem, which is the common people, how can we ensure that it's used fairly and also used in a way that it's inclusive, right? That's the other question. I mean, any thoughts on that, Parul?
Yeah, so I think ethical utilization, like we all talk about it, that AI has biases and we need to correct. But the important thing, especially when it comes to finance, is to understand about is the data. That the data that we are looking at, especially for these underprivileged communities, it doesn't exist. They've not been banking in the past. And you're trying to make decisions on giving them a loan or giving them credit based on no data at all. So if there is no data, what is it that the AI is going to learn? So how do we use the AI to actually create synthetic data probably, which can help in sorting out this problem? And then who is taking the accountability for these decisions? So on the counter side, if you look at false positives, everything that we are doing right now is also impacting the good people, right? If you're trying to stop a transaction which is happening, saying that it is a highly suspected transaction, it could be done by someone who's 80 years old and is really in dire needs. So how do you keep counterbalancing these needs? And who would be really responsible? Like the accountability, who's responsible if you're stopping them?
Got it.
So I think those two aspects we need to really look at more closely when we are looking at this.
Are there any emerging solutions from an RBIH hat that you're wearing that you could enlighten us, perhaps?
Yes, of course. So from our side, our CEO was here this morning, Mr. Rajesh Bansal. He also spoke about this.
Right.
So there is one big problem that we are addressing right now, that of money mules.
Right.
So the way fraud is presently happening, if you're not able to detect it in real time, the money just flows through the system all at once and it's scattered and dispersed before you can even locate where it really went to. So the model, the MuleHunter.ai model that we have developed right now, that is exactly focused on this. How do you ensure that in real time, we are able to stop transactions, detect them, and at the same time ensure that all the good transactions which are happening, they can continue seamlessly.
So this is something that's going to be available commonly very soon for all of us?
It's already in the works, yeah. Okay. Already a few banks have partnered with us and it's going to be very shortly, it's in production.
I'm sure we're going to sign up very soon as well.
Definitely, we look forward to that, yeah.
The other piece, and ma'am, this is for you perhaps, is the one part which you talked about is how we can use it in an unbiased way. The other part is how can we ensure that biases don't creep in, right? Because we're going to use these data anyway. But how do we ensure there are no biases there?
It's really a function of how you enter the data, right? There could be legacy biases which creep in unexpectedly or unintentionally.
Right.
You could have a gender bias, you could have a caste bias, you could have a rural bias, as Parul said, because there's less data available. And so I think there will have to be some element of human intervention. Because if you just leave it to the machine and the model, you will get probably wrong results because the data sets are not complete. The data sets have gaps.
Right.
Who will fill those gaps?
Right.
And will there not be human intervention, at least in the beginning, until the data builds itself up correctly?
Right.
So what goes in has to be very careful.
Right. I mean, that's obviously a simple solution, human intervention, but some of the scale that we operate in, sometimes it's not humanly possible. And I think there are technologies that are emerging, I suppose, and maybe Sabya, you can talk about it, that can help with this. Do you foresee anything that's coming?
I mean, I already spoke about the technology, so I would not repeat that. But what I would say is the human in the loop would continue for a longer time.
Okay.
The reason is because while we are saying ethical use of AI, there are 3 or 4 things. Who takes the accountability? Ma'am said that. Human ensures that. The next is, what happens to the edge cases which machine cannot understand but human can?
Yes.
There are edge cases, which is, we call it the disadvantaged part of the society. You don't want to rule them out, right? Machine can. So you need, again, human. The third being, how do you explain the AI? Again, you may need human for that. And then, I mean, if you marry all these 3, I don't know whether strategically you should take human out or keep human.
Right.
So I feel human should be kept to make it
Right.
for a greater purpose. And while you're doing this, there are a couple of things I believe should be done. Many organizations have started doing that. You should form an ethics committee,
Right.
which should have people from data science, compliance, legal. It's not just a product that you make and you start
Right.
using it. There are pros and cons, and I think these three should be doing that.
Also, if there are too many rejections, then that should have some red alert within your system. And there should be a review as to where there's a pattern of rejections for the same cause.
Got it.
And then again, you fix it.
Got it.
But I think just to automate it and leave it on its own will, as Parul says, leave a lot of people out of the system, which is exactly the opposite of what we want.
So we need to avoid demographic bias,
Right. Right.
pretty
I mean,
much. So you
demographic bias, gender bias. I mean, there
gender
are plenty
bias.
of biases that
Yeah,
are creeping
absolutely.
into it. Yes.
And you need to also keep the red button mechanism. That means if it fails, the human should be able to
Right.
process.
Set it
It
right,
shouldn't
yes.
fail completely.
Correct.
There should also be kind of adversary models where you stress test the models.
Right. Yes.
Very few have started doing it. We are feeling that everything is hunky-dory. That's not the case.
Correct.
There are many
But how
false
do you
positives.
deal with his question that if it is such big scale, how many humans will you employ?
No, I would not say today also it has been there, right? I mean, the ecosystem is already using human. It's only going to reduce. So we can definitely keep some part still engaged in the process.
You doubt it, ma'am? You don't think that's humanly possible?
You're asking
Yeah.
that human intervention will not
Would it be possible at the scale that we're talking about here? Because we're talking about 1 billion Indians.
But Ramesh,
Yeah.
it'll have to be if you want the right result. At least in the beginning,
Right.
till your machine gets smarter and you've weeded out the biases.
I guess the question is what is smarter, right? Because, for example, I'll take an example, right? If a system has been approving certain demographic for loans and it's excluding someone else, right? In historical sense, it might be true, but you might want to bring in, newer participants into the ecosystem, which the system might not approve because it's obviously trained. So the question is, human beings, yes, but
then
at
you
what
have to
scale?
retrain the system, no?
That's-
you have
that's
to
fair.
make the system get smarter.
Right,
And
right.
accept the new data
Right,
and
right.
not repel it.
Yeah. No, I agree. It is a problem that we as an industry have to solve. There's no easy solution in sight, but seems like we'll have to live for some time in this gray period where there's not enough, let's call it our own oversight perhaps, and you bring in humans and manage that for some time and then
Yeah, but
hopefully
as
machines can take
L&T
over.
Finance, what choice do you have? You want to pay 250 crores every time? Huh? No. Raju will
Yeah.
come at you. So you have to have a system
Yes.
which allows for sufficient review.
Right.
And you have to have reg flags where if there's a pattern
Right.
which is seemingly unnatural,
Right.
you have to look at it in the beginning. It may
Right.
go on for a couple of years or
Yes.
more.
Yeah.
Ultimately, it will be for your benefit.
Yes, yes. No, I agree. I think you're spot on. It's just that I think as one of the early innovators and adopters of technology, you want to kind of, perhaps postpone it as much as possible in some ways, I feel, right? So I think this is great. I mean, perhaps a final question, Parul, on this topic, right? You talked about a certain innovations that's happening out there. What else can we look forward to from the innovation hub itself that can enlighten us on this space? Yeah.
Sure. So I think one important fact which we should all acknowledge is that AI is a very big term. It's not that AI can be accommodating automations also to this day. We're talking about machine learning models which have been there since decades now. And then we're also talking about this Gen AI, image analytics, unstructured data. So definitely, I think in the coming time, that's what's getting everybody's attention, that with all these new technologies coming forth, how do we use AI better from a credit underwriting perspective? So that's one area definitely, that how do we make AI work for the unbanked? like street vendors, gig workers, what kind of models would work there where there is little data. The other part is how do we use it for better grievance redressal? And grievance redressal, again, chatbots have been around for ages, but
Yes.
nobody uses them. They're not multilingual. They're not addressing people's needs who can't write, who can't talk in English.
You've not just seen a demo that we had.
Sorry?
We have a pretty cool chatbot that's coming up, that's launched
Yeah.
today. You haven't seen the demo yet.
I did actually. I saw
Yeah.
the demo. So I'm just saying that this is, again, something that
Right.
we as RBIH are also focused on.
Correct.
And it's not that what we are developing is, a counter to what the industry is doing.
Right.
What we want is to bring all the industry players together.
Right.
We are not in competition. We
Right.
want that whatever the industry is developing, we do not need to go back and continuously reinvent the wheel institution by institution. So
Got
if
it.
there's something available, we try to bridge that gap. We try to ensure that the entire ecosystem can benefit. And that's why even with the fraud solution I was talking about, the idea is that fraud is right now not operating in silos. It's a
Right.
network out there. It's
Right.
not one fraudster.
Right.
So if you'll stop the fraud in one bank, they'll just go and open it up in another bank.
Yep.
So unless all the controls are there across the ecosystem, it's not going to work. So that's the whole focus, that, how do we use this Gen AI the way they are using it to target us? How do we use all this technology, all this knowledge, all this information from social media coming in, and how do we counter and make it work for the benefit of the people?
Got it. Point taken.
Ramesh, if I can add on this,
Yeah.
on the fraud, we see it day in, day out. I'm very sure they are doing a similar conference somewhere else, like we are doing.
Yes.
So you can pretty much be ready. It can only be done away or minimized if all the industry participants collaborate and come together. It is not possible for a single institute, whether it's a financial institute or a technology player or a regulator, to solve it single-handedly. It is all of them coming together is when we can stop that conference happening somewhere.
Yeah.
Otherwise,
But you
we
can't
can-
have things like ethical hackers in your industry.
There are.
Yeah.
There are.
So then use them.
These are very different.
No, don't go to the bad guys. But the ethical hackers will at least work with you to say, okay, if somebody does this, this is how you put up some walls to prevent it, no?
There are ways and means, like Kedar just showed a while back to all of us. There are technological advancements that's happening to stop. But we still see every day something new. So, they are also smarter guys. So it is not that if we are
Ahead
doing
of
to
the
counter
game.
technology,
Ahead
they
of
are
the
also using the technology to counter.
Yes.
Yeah, just one more point, that it's not that the fraud that we are seeing today is going to be static.
Right.
We stop this type of fraud, they think of something else. So this
Yes,
conference
exactly.
which they might
Yes,
be having
yes.
somewhere is about this, that what's the next way we can use, because there's just too many people aware about this type of fraud. So what's the next thing we can target?
No, I think definitely those are very valid points. So maybe the final question, I'll give this to you, Sabya, in some ways. And what are you most excited about in terms of what you're doing today that will kind of help shape some of this constant, let's say, cat chasing its tail or dog chasing its tail kind of situation that we are in?
I always say, as a data processor, and we deal with so much of data, the one thing that worries me or takes my sleep away is that how do we protect the data? And I think that's the biggest point we need to try to solve overall as an industry, and us definitely, because you keep hearing a data breach somewhere happening. So while you have multiple technologies, frameworks, firewalls that you have built around, but somebody is still hacking, breaching those. So one thing that worries me is always that, at scale, and huge scale that India has seen, while Parul was saying that we see on the payment side so many million transactions
Right.
happening in an hour. Imagine at that scale, at real time, to stop a breach, to stop a fraud is not easy.
Right.
So we can't compare with some other country because they are not real time, first of all.
Yes. Yes.
We are the only country who is doing a lot of real time.
Right.
So I think that is something that worries me. And we should be aware how to protect
What
those.
is the amount of transactions that happen every day in UPI and stuff like that? Millions, right? So that's your point.
Billions.
You can't compare it to any other country.
Yeah. On that note, I think I'm going to pause there because we've already gone over our time. and maybe open it up to the audience if you have one or two questions. Obviously, this is a fairly complex topic. There are no easy answers. I think we're all trying to work towards a solution, but would love to hear some questions. I think I see a hand up there. Yeah.
Just don't ask for solutions.
Hello. Yeah, thank you. I
That's a
think
good
it's
one.
an amazing session. I would like to first of all congratulate all the panel members for wonderful brainstorming and some of the questions which doesn't have even the answers. So first, thank you and congratulations. I have a question for Dr. Parul because she is with Reserve Bank Innovation Hub. Recently, one of a very big Indian bank came up with a new version of their app, and it was complete revamp of the app, and it didn't work for me. The reason we tried, it didn't work, it keeps on giving error. So I communicated with the bank, and then the IT department came up that you have not given access for this app to your photographs and to your camera, which is the mandatory now. So I have to give access, otherwise my app won't work, I won't be able to do banking. Where is the regulatory authority saying, why would you need that? And they said, oh, if we need to do a new product KYC, okay, like gentleman said, Sabyasachi ji's, data should be taken, used for the purpose, and purge it out. Why would an unlimited access required? Where is the regulatory authority asking this shouldn't be asked for? Or my app won't work, I won't be able to do my banking. And this is one of the very top bank in India. So my question is, what role regulatory plays in going into such deeper aspect of how the programming of the banking IT department? Because once this kind of things integrate with an AI, I have given up a complete control of my mobile with access to cameras, access to photographs. Why would they need my personal photographs? So this is my question. What is the role of regulatory in such things?
Yeah.
So just to clarify, the RBIH is not a regulator. Like, we are the innovation hub. I'm just sharing this.
Yeah, she
so
always
do not,
gets asked
do
this.
not
Sorry,
take,
I
so do not
apologize.
take my response to be exactly what the regulator might respond here. But what you are raising is a very valid point. And the regulator has not stipulated this, first of all. So it's not coming from the regulator that, yes, you need to allow access to your own personal data necessarily. It could be something which the bank might have said. And the regulator allows some flexibility to banks to mandate certain things if required. I don't think this is something which the regulator has said that the banks should require. Having said that, of course, that is a very valid concern. I think if that is, that you have faced this issue in the new app, you should definitely bring this to the notice of the regulator. Because this is not something that, if it's you who's facing this problem, this will be something that others would also face. Typically, what we've seen is that banks say that, okay, it's a one-time thing, that, okay, I will allow access to my camera or whatever for this particular session, and it usually ends just like Sabya was talking about. So this is something that, has just been brought to my attention, and, I think we'll definitely raise this.
Yeah.
But the point is, can you go to the next field when opening your bank account or doing what you can with your bank if you say no? Or there's no option of saying no?
There is no option.
So that's her point.
So you are going to get a lot of business very shortly. This is the crux of the matter, that a lot of people are going to come and say
You
that
don't have proper answers. What do you say?
they're going to come to you. They're going to say that my data is being forcefully asked from me.
Maybe we'll take one last question. There's a gentleman there, and then we'll have to stop. We're almost out of time here.
So first of all, thank you panelists. This was a very interesting conversation. Zia ma'am, loved your wit in that in your conversations. Thank you for that. I actually, more than asking question, I had a comment to share. I actually am from a company named Novamind Tech. We provide implementation of AI, ethical AI implementation advisory. So we just wanted to add that there are standards, like you mentioned earlier, that there are rules that should be implemented. There are actually already certain rule sets that are available through the EU Ethical AI Act, as well as the ISO 42001 standards that could be implemented to ensure that your AI models are ethical and well structured. So just wanted to share a comment there, to be honest.
This is for you.
No, for the ma'am, it was just just a comment that
itself.
loved your wit.
I
but,
think, I have been told by my lawyers that the consultation paper and the statute to read is the Singapore one. They have really thought through a lot. There's a lot to learn from that. The only question is it's 20 million people.
Yeah.
And we are 1.4.
Yeah. On that note, I know we don't have answers. Hopefully this has spurred some thought in anyone's mind, and hopefully the next time a survey is sent out, 100% of the people are worried indeed on the privacy. Sorry, Aparna, I don't think we have time. We've already way out of time, so we'll have to cancel there. All right? Thank you. Thank you, participants.